It's a hot evening in the south of the USA. On Jackson Street, life flowed in its regular course. Children rode bicycles, neighbors shouted over the fence, discussing the latest gossip, and an old dog on the porch of one of the houses lazily caught annoying flies with his tail. Among all this there was one house, not the most noticeable, but with a special charm that could not be explained in words. The white facade was already cracked, the wooden shutters needed painting for a long time, and the sagging fence added a touch of comfort to the overall picture. It was Mabel's house. Mabel, an elderly woman with a history, knew that this place was her fortress. Despite all the difficulties, the house kept her memories like an old album with yellowed photographs. Her skin was like a map, on which every line told about her past. The years spent on the plantations, the struggle for rights, losses and joys, all this was written on her face. But her eyes, warm and deep, seemed to promise that she was still young at heart. She had a ritual. Every evening she sat on the porch in her rocking chair, took a cup of mint tea, and watched the sunset. It was her way of thanking life for another day. Tonight was no exception. She was sitting listening to the cicadas holding their eternal concert when a man appeared on the path leading to her house. Tall, thin, but with a confidence in his gait that she would have recognized from afar. It was her youngest grandson, Jamal. He was returning home after several years of living in the big city, and now his footsteps sounded on the dusty path like the return of the prodigal son.
Wait a minute. Who are you? Is it really my Jamal? Or do I need to wear glasses?
Jamal stopped, smiled faintly, and shook his head slightly. Grandma always liked to dramatize, but that was her charm.
It's me, Grandma. Did you finally find out? I thought you weren't happy to see me.
Glad, you say? I thought you'd already forgotten how to find your way here in the big city. Have you come to borrow money?
Her tone was harsh, but Jamal knew it was just a mask. She was always like this underneath her sarcastic words. There was a huge heart.
No, Grandma, I just decided to visit you. And the money. Well, if you offer, I won't refuse.
Mabel laughed. That laugh, loud and infectious, was her calling card. She rose from her chair, tapping her cane on the wooden porch floor.
Come here, bully. Well, what are you doing standing up there like a hillbilly at a fair? Come in, tell me what the wind brought you here.
They hugged. There was something maternal in her embrace, even though she had been more than just a mother for a long time. For Jamal, this moment was something native, almost sacred. Inside the house, everything looked the same as in his childhood. The walls were decorated with family photos, which radiated warmth. One of them was a young Mabel, with a beaming smile and lush hair. On the other is her husband, serious and a little sullen. In the center of the living room was the same table where they had once eaten cornbread together and discussed the news. Jamal sat down at the table, and Mabel took out her favorite ceramic mug from the closet, pouring him tea.
Come on, tell me, why are you drawn back to the roots? Is everything really that bad in that city of yours?
It's not that bad, Grandma. It's just. Everything is different there. People are some kind of strangers. You run all day, you work, and in the end you feel like you haven't done anything. There's no one smiling just like that, you know.
Mabel listened attentively with her head cocked to one side. Her gaze was full of understanding.
Oh, Jamal, I told you that back then. These big cities of yours are good for those who have forgotten where it comes from. But you're not like that. You're from Jackson Street. This is where you belong.
You're right, Grandma. It's just that I felt like I had to achieve something there. Do you understand? To prove something to someone. And now I'm back and I'm thinking, who do I owe what to?
Mabel came closer and put her hand on his shoulder.
Listen to me, boy. The only one you owe something to is yourself. And maybe your family, but not to the city. Not to these people who look down on you. Do you understand?
Jamal nodded. He could feel her words penetrating deeper than just his ears.
Thanks, Grandma. You always know what to say.
Of course I know, and don't you dare forget about it. Now come on, take your tea, and then tell me everything in order. What are these people of yours so annoying about?
They continued the conversation, laughing and remembering the past. Jamal talked about his failures, how he worked nights to pay the rent, and how people always looked down on him. And Mabel shared her stories about how she and his grandfather once fought for their rights, how they experienced poverty, and how they eventually realized that the main thing was to be true to themselves. This evening was something special for both of them. Jamal felt like he was returning to his roots, and Mabel was enjoying the rare moment when someone from her family actually listened to her. They both realized that this house is not just a place. This is their common home, where life goes on despite all the difficulties. Jamal entered his grandmother's house early in the morning as soon as the first rays of the sun broke through the heavy curtains of the living room. The old floor creaked so loudly under his feet that it seemed as if he was waking up not only the house but the whole neighborhood. A newspaper lay open on the table in the center of the room, and a cup stood next to it, from which a faint aroma of cold coffee rose. The house smelled like a mixture of lavender, soap, and old books. This smell was an integral part of Grandma's world. Mabel came down the stairs slowly, leaning on her cane. Her eyes shone, despite the signs of fatigue, and her lips formed a sly smile, like a person who knows more than he is ready to say.
Did you run around like a cat again at night? Or am I blind that I didn't hear you come?
Jamal, who was standing at the window and looking out at the courtyard, turned around, smiling guiltily. He had an old photograph in his hands. He found it in a stack of papers on a shelf. In the picture, young Mabel was with his grandfather, dressed in strict outfits, but with sincere smiles on their faces.
You were a queen back then, Grandma. Look at you, a real fashion icon.
Mabel squinted at the photo. Her face softened, but she immediately waved her hand, as if it didn't matter.
The queen, you say? Those old rags cost less than your sneakers now, and your grandfather had just learned how to tie a rope. What did you find there? Tell me.
Jamal put the photo on the table and sat down on a chair opposite his grandmother.
I just found it while I was looking for an old album. Do you remember how you taught me to draw? You said I had talent. And now I'm looking at these drawings and wondering how you can even say that. It's terrible.
Don't you dare talk about your art like that. You put your soul into every drawing then, and that's the main thing. And if you're such a critic now, maybe it's time to pick up a pencil again? Or are you already too important for that?
Jamal laughed and then was silent for a moment, looking at his grandmother with warmth.
I don't know, Grandma. Back in the city, it seems that there is no place for such things. You need to be faster, stronger, more successful. And art, well, it's not for people like me.
Nonsense. Art is for everyone, even for those who decided to run away to the city and forget that they have a home. You've never been like this, Jamal. You're not the type to chase someone else's success.
His grandmother's words seemed to sting him. He looked away, feeling the weight of her rightness. As a child, Jamal really dreamed of becoming an artist, drawing comics, heroes, and his own worlds. But city life and the expectations of others forced him to abandon this path. Grandma, seeing his thoughtful expression, sat down next to him and put her hand on his shoulder.
I'm glad you're back. Even if you think you're nobody right now, I know who you are. You're my grandson, which means you can do anything if you want to.
Later in the afternoon, they decided to take a walk around the yard. Jamal helped his grandmother out onto the porch, and then they slowly walked along the fence. Mabel told him stories about the neighbors, who recently bought a new car, who got a dog, and who got into trouble with the law again. Her voice sounded light, and she laughed when she shared these gossips. Jamal listened, but his thoughts kept returning to her words. He felt that he was missing this place. He felt at home here, next to his grandmother. The city was alien, cold, demanding. And here he could be himself. They stopped at an old tree growing on the edge of the lot. It was a tree that Jamal loved as a child. He often climbed its branches, and his grandmother scolded him for ruined shirts.
Do you remember how you chased me from this tree? I climbed anyway, even when you threatened to tell Grandpa.
Of course I remember, but you know what I would never say. You were my boy. And your grandfather would only laugh. You had the heart of an explorer. You still have it. You just forgot it.
Jamal thought about her words. He looked at the tree, at its sturdy branches, at the roots going deep into the ground. This tree symbolized something more, a connection with this place, with its roots.
You're right, Grandma. It's like I've lost something trying to be someone else. Maybe I need to stop and figure out what I need.
Exactly. And you are not alone in this. You have a family. You have me. And trust me, that's enough to start over.
They continued their walk, enjoying the warm sun and silence. It was the day Jamal felt that coming home was the right decision. He realized that his grandmother had always been the anchor that held him back, even when he tried to sail too far. It's been a few days since Jamal returned to his grandmother's house. Their quiet routine established itself. Morning tea on the porch, slow walks around the yard, and long evenings over old family albums. Every corner of this house was filled with history, and every memory seemed to Jamal like a breath of air after the bustling city. But there was something else in the air, viscous, heavy. Beneath the surface of cozy everyday life, there was a silence that spoke more than words. Grandma was always strong. Her way of speaking, her actions, her resilience, everything about her screamed that she was used to coping with difficulties. But Jamal saw something he probably hadn't noticed before. Cracks in that armor. Tired eyes, a paused breath before she got up from the chair, and the look she cast at the photos, not just with warmth, but with some kind of bitter regret. On one of these evenings, they were sorting through an old box of documents. Jamal found Grandma's diaries there. Outwardly, they looked modest. Small notebooks with yellowed pages. He was surprised that his grandmother kept diaries at all. To him, she was always a person of action, not reflection. But the notes that he glanced at briefly turned out to be saturated with emotion. There were pages where Mabel talked about the difficult times when she worked from dawn to dusk on cotton plantations to feed her children. There were lines about the loss of her husband, how she raised 5 children alone, and how she once had to sell an engagement ring to pay for medical bills. But most of all, Jamal was moved by her words about her family. She wrote how she missed the children's voices in the house, how she dreamed that her children as adults would not forget their roots. Jamal also found his own references in these diaries. His grandmother described his childhood with such love and pride that it hurt him to realize how little he knew about her life. She wrote how she admired his creative abilities, how she believed that he could achieve something great. These notes were a reminder that she had always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. Every day, Jamal plunged deeper into the world of his grandmother's memories. She told him about her youth, about how she and his grandfather met at a dance, about how they fought for their rights together, participating in protests, about how she once had to take refuge in a church when their house was almost burned down for refusing to obey racial laws. These stories weren't just stories. They were reminders of what his family had been through so that he could live a better life. But behind every memory, there was pain. Mabel spoke of her children with love, but there was disappointment in her voice. Her sons and daughters rarely came, too busy with their lives. She didn't blame them, but Jamal could feel her heart, yearning for the days when the house was full of laughter and bustle. One evening, while sorting through another box, Jamal found an old letter. It was addressed to his grandmother, but judging by the fact that it was lying unopened, she never read it. The handwriting on the envelope was neat but unfamiliar. Jamal, unable to contain his curiosity, opened the letter. It contained a short but sincere note from a woman who thanked Mabel for helping her through a difficult period. The woman wrote that if it hadn't been for Mabel, she would never have been able to survive. This letter was a reminder of how strong and kind his grandmother was. But there were also things that Mabel didn't want to discuss. When the conversation turned to her health, she waved it off, changing the subject. Jamal noticed how her hands were shaking, how she rarely left the house without a cane. He tried to ask her about it, but she just waved him off. Old age is not a disease, boy. We all have our weaknesses. However, he understood that it was not just about old age. Her fatigue was not only physical, but also emotional. The strength she displayed was an unbearable burden that she had carried for too long. This period has become important for Jamal. He began to realize that when he returned home, he was not only returning to his roots, but also discovering a new level of understanding of his grandmother. Her life of trials inspired him. Her struggle reminded him that real success is not a career and money, but the ability to stay true to yourself and your loved ones despite difficulties. Mabel's hidden wounds, her loneliness, fatigue, loss of loved ones, became a reminder to him that you can't ignore those who have been around all your life. For Jamal, these days were not just a time of return, but a lesson that he could not receive in any city. His grandmother had been an example of unbroken strength to him, but now he saw her vulnerability, and in that vulnerability was her real beauty. One quiet morning after breakfast, spent under the whisper of the wind and the clink of spoons on porcelain cups, Jamal came across an old, dusty chest in the far corner of the living room. He had never noticed it before, perhaps because the trunk was littered with blankets that Grandma used to hide it from view. When he opened it, he was struck by the richness of its contents: photographs, yellowed letters, antique books with inscriptions in the margins, medals, and even faded postcards with inscriptions like, "With love from Alabama." It was a real treasure trove, a repository of their family's history. Taking one of the photos, in which a young man and a woman were holding hands, Jamal realized that these were his grandparents. They looked happy, full of hope. Mabel's look in this picture was something he hadn't seen her in a long time: bright, alive. He realized that this chest was the key to her past, which could help him better understand her life. He decided that it was time to bring order to this wealth. At first, he planned to just put everything in folders to keep it from being destroyed, but as he delved into the contents, he realized how deep and rich their family's history was. Everything had a story. Every detail spoke of a time, people, and place that he knew only by hearsay. After collecting all the artifacts, Jamal suggested that Mabel start creating a family archive. At first, she reacted to this idea with disbelief, as if she did not understand why she would waste time sorting out all sorts of junk. But when he showed her an old photo of her wedding, where she stood next to her grandfather in a white dress, her eyes lit up. She agreed, but on the condition that the work would be done thoroughly. And the painstaking work began. They took out everything that mattered: old letters, birth certificates, medals, photo albums, even kitchen utensils that were part of their history. Jamal fit into this process surprisingly easily. His grandmother became a real guide to the past, telling where and when each photo was taken, to whom certain things belonged. He discovered that many of the stories he thought were funny anecdotes from her past were actually much deeper and more serious. For example, the old dress he saw in the trunk turned out to be a dress that his grandmother wore to civil rights marches. The medal with an illegible inscription was my grandfather's award for his participation in the First World War. Each object turned into a window into another world. Diving into the family archive became not only physical, but also emotional work. Jamal understood more and more how the generations of their family were connected. He realized that his successes, difficulties, and even inner doubts were the result of all the decisions his ancestors had made. Things that seemed ordinary to him suddenly acquired a symbolic meaning. His letters especially touched him. He found them in every corner of the house, in books, in boxes, in drawers with clothes. Some were from grandfather to grandmother, full of tenderness and love. Others are from her children, when they were just starting an independent life. There were letters from her friends, with whom she had once shared her innermost thoughts. Every word in these messages brought to life images of people he had never known, but with whom he now felt connected. The creation of the archive has become a ritual. Every morning they laid out the documents, and in the evening they sat on the porch and discussed what they had found. For Jamal, it was a revelation of how rich and complex their family's history was. And for Mabel, it was a way to refresh her memories and feel that her past was important. The key point was how Jamal processed the found photos. He decided to create not just an archive, but a real family chronicle. He digitized the pictures, restored the faded photos, and added notes to them with his grandmother's words. The resulting pages looked like a story in pictures, from the youth of her parents to the time when she raised her children herself. This process has become for them something more than just an analysis of antiquity. He strengthened their bond, made it deeper. Through stories and collaboration, they became closer than ever. Jamal began to see his grandmother not only as a strong woman who raised him, but also as a person who had gone through incredible trials and still retained faith in goodness. For Mabel, this process has become a kind of therapy. She has long been used to hiding her feelings, keeping the pain of loss and disappointment to herself. But now, through the memories, it was as if she was reliving moments of joy and pride. She saw how her grandson was in awe of her past, and it gave her strength. The work on the archive took several weeks. They spent hours digitizing photographs, creating records, filing letters, and even compiling a family tree. But for them, this time flew by unnoticed. These weeks have become the time when grandmother and grandson have become truly one team. They laughed, cried, argued, but most importantly, they understood each other better. When the archive was finished, they made the final touch, a large album where each page told a separate chapter of their story. On the last page, Jamal added a photo of his grandmother, taken recently after his return. Under the photo, he wrote, "Thank you for teaching me to appreciate where I come from." For Jamal, this archive has become more than just a project. He became a symbol of his connection with his family, with the past, and with himself. He felt that through this job, he had found something that he had long lost, his identity. And for Mabel, it was a reminder that her life was meaningful, and her story will live on for generations to come. Life seemed to have settled into its usual routine. Jamal and Mabel enjoyed morning tea parties, walks around the yard, and evenings devoted to watching old movies. Their joint work on the family archive not only brought them closer together, but also gave the house a new atmosphere, a reminder of the importance of connecting generations. However, the calmness turned out to be deceptive. Soon their usual rhythm was disrupted by a sudden crisis, which made Jamal look at his grandmother in a completely different way. Nothing seemed to portend trouble. The morning began, as usual, with the smell of freshly brewed tea and sunlight filtering through the curtains. But Jamal noticed that Grandma stayed in her bedroom longer than usual. She was usually already on her feet, working in the kitchen or sitting in her rocking chair. Today, her silence was alarming. When Jamal looked into her room, he saw that Mabel was sitting on the bed, breathing heavily. Her face looked pale, and her eyes looked tired. Her usually confident movements became slow and hesitant. To Jamal's questions, she just waved her hand, trying to pretend that everything was fine. But her condition suggested otherwise. Grandma's condition was getting worse. Her breathing became more and more ragged, and there were noticeable traces of pain on her face. Jamal, realizing that the matter was serious, insisted on calling a doctor. Soon a doctor came to the house, who conducted an examination and prescribed several tests. After that, he informed her that Mabel may have heart problems that require immediate treatment. This news was a blow to Jamal. Up to this point, he had always perceived his grandmother as an indomitable woman, capable of overcoming any difficulties. She was the epitome of strength and resilience for him. But now he saw her in a different light, vulnerable, in need of help. This realization turned his idea of her upside down. Strangely enough, Mabel met the news calmly. She was used to coping with life's difficulties, and this situation was no exception. However, her calmness did not calm Jamal. He felt responsible for her health and decided that he had to take care of her. The following days were a test for them. Jamal took care of his grandmother, helping her with daily chores, buying medicines and monitoring her diet. He learned how to cook her favorite dishes so that they fit her new dietary restrictions, and spent many hours reading about her condition to better understand how to help her. Jamal's daily routine had changed. If before he could afford to spend the day painting or walking, now all his attention was focused on his grandmother. It wasn't easy, but he didn't complain. He felt it was his duty, and he knew that this time he was spending with Mabel was priceless. Mabel, despite her condition, tried not to lose her fighting spirit. She continued to joke, finding reasons to laugh even in difficult moments. However, there were days when her fatigue was noticeable. She increasingly stayed in her room, resting on the bed, and her activity was minimized. For Jamal, it was a lesson in humility and understanding. He saw how life can change in an instant, and it reminded him of the importance of appreciating every moment. He began to think more about his future, about what he wants to do, and how he can keep what is dear to him. One evening, after he helped his grandmother go to bed, Jamal sat on the porch and thought. The starry sky overhead reminded him of those summer nights he spent here as a child, dreaming of who he would become. Now he realized that his dreams were important, but it was equally important not to forget about his roots and family. The crisis they faced was a challenge for them, but also an opportunity for growth. Jamal felt that he had become stronger. Taking care of his grandmother revealed qualities in him that he had never suspected before: patience, attention to detail, the ability to put another person's needs above his own. Mabel, despite her weakness, found the strength to share with her grandson the wisdom she had accumulated over the years. She told him stories about her youth, how she coped with difficulties, and how important it was not to lose faith in herself. These stories inspired Jamal, helping him cope with his own fears and doubts. Gradually, thanks to Jamal's care and prescribed treatment, Mabel's condition began to improve. This did not mean that she had fully recovered, but her breathing became smoother and her strength began to return. For both of them, it was a small victory, a reminder that even in the most difficult situations, there is hope. These events changed them both. For Mabel, it was a reminder that she can rely on her family, and for Jamal, it was a lesson about how important it is to connect with loved ones. He realized that his place was with those who loved him, and that his future lay not only with his ambitions, but also with how he would support those who supported him. It's been a few weeks since the crisis that changed Jamal and Mabel's lives. The house seemed to be filled with tranquility again, but it was a deceptive feeling. Their days became a routine full of care and mutual support. However, in this routine, feelings that had previously been hidden behind layers of family relationships and familiar intimacy began to manifest themselves. For Jamal, this time was a period of deep reflection. Taking care of his grandmother opened up something new in him that he hadn't realized before. He enjoyed spending time with her, more than he had ever imagined. In every little thing, whether it was her look, her habits, or even her stubbornness, he found something valuable. It wasn't just affection for a loved one, it was something more. He couldn't explain it in words, but he felt that something inside him was changing. Mabel also felt the changes, although she tried not to show it. Her life has always been governed by strict rules, based on family and traditions. She raised her children, raised her grandchildren, and was proud that she always put their interests above her own. But with Jamal, it was different. He was not just her grandson, he was her mainstay, her close friend in difficult times. She noticed how much he had grown in recent weeks, how his concern for her was filled with sincerity, not just a sense of duty. In the evenings, when the silence of the house was filled only with the sounds of cicadas outside the window, they often sat together, sometimes silently, sometimes remembering the past. At these moments, an invisible bond seemed to arise between them, which went beyond the usual family ties. Jamal noticed his grandmother looking at him with a smile that was filled with something he couldn't immediately recognize. There was not only love in her eyes, but also a depth that he had not noticed before. One of the turning points was the day Jamal decided to do something special for Mabel. He wanted her to feel how much he appreciated her. Inspired by their joint work on the family archive, he decided to create something personal for her. He took one of her old photographs, in which she was young, energetic, and full of hope, and began to paint her portrait. It was the first time in many years that he picked up a pencil again. His childhood hobby, long abandoned, suddenly took on a new meaning. Working on the portrait became for Jamal not just a way to express his feelings, but also a way to understand them. Every stroke of the pencil, every detail of her face that he transferred to paper, seemed to him to be part of a puzzle that he was trying to put together. He couldn't deny that his feelings for his grandmother had become more complicated. It wasn't just gratitude or respect. It was affection that he couldn't fully explain, even to himself. When the portrait was finished, Jamal felt strangely calm. He realized that his feelings for his grandmother did not fit into the usual framework, but he did not feel fear or shame because of this. It was just a feeling of rightness, as if his heart had found what it was looking for. For Mabel, this portrait was an unexpected gift. When Jamal showed it to her, she was amazed. She saw not only her face, but also how he sees her. Strong, beautiful, full of life. At that moment, she realized that Jamal was also more than just a grandson to her. This realization was both frightening and liberating. She saw in him a man who understood her better than anyone else. These feelings began to manifest themselves in their daily lives. Mabel noticed how her heart skipped a beat when Jamal touched her hand, helping her to get up from the chair. Jamal, in turn, became more attentive to her words, gestures, even to her silence. Their bond grew deeper and deeper, and it was something they both began to realize. But with this realization came doubts. Mabel, despite her feelings, understood that society would never accept what she was beginning to feel. Her age, her status, her role in the family, all this was a barrier. She struggled with herself, trying to suppress what was beginning to blossom in her heart. Jamal was also aware that their feelings were complicated and did not fit into the usual framework, but he couldn't deny their existence. It was a challenge for both of them. They felt that their bond was unique, but they were afraid of the consequences. Every day they teetered on the edge, trying to figure out how to be honest with themselves, but not destroy what they have. These feelings became their common secret, which they could not share even with themselves. However, despite their doubts and fears, their bond grew stronger. Every moment they spent together only confirmed that they had found something rare and valuable. It was more than family love. It was a spiritual closeness that united them despite all the obstacles. The day came when Jamal and Mabel could no longer ignore the feelings that were growing between them. Their lives, full of minutiae and rituals, seemed harmonious from the outside, but emotions and doubts raged inside each of them. This harmony was like a thin web, ready to burst at the slightest movement. They both understood. They needed to talk. They needed to put everything in its place in order to figure out where to move on. For Mabel, this realization was especially difficult. She has lived a long life filled with difficulties, joys, and losses. Her children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren have become her pride and the meaning of life. But what she began to feel for Jamal was something she couldn't explain to herself or anyone else. She knew that her feelings were out of the ordinary, and it scared her. At the same time, she felt that these emotions were sincere and honest, that they came from the very heart. Jamal also felt lost. He had returned home to find himself, and now he realized that he had found something more. But this more was so complicated that he was afraid to even think about it. He respected his grandmother, admired her, and saw her as a source of strength and inspiration. But his feelings crossed the boundaries of ordinary love for a loved one. They became deeper, almost connected them on a spiritual level. One evening, when the house was silent and night reigned outside the windows, both felt that this moment had come. This was not a conversation that could be postponed. It was a moment when the truth had to be told, even if it turned out to be painful. Mabel started talking first. She told about her life, about how the loss of her husband left a void in her heart that she could not fill, about how her children, whom she loved more than anything in the world, gradually drifted away from her. She admitted that her house became a quiet refuge for her, but at the same time, it became a place where she felt lonely. And everything changed when Jamal returned. His care, attention, and love gave her a new breath. She felt alive. Jamal listened without interrupting. He knew that her words were important, that they were the key to understanding how they both felt. When it was his turn to speak, he talked about his fears, about how he lost himself in the city, how he felt lonely among a lot of people, and how his return to his grandmother became for him a return to the roots, to the origins. He admitted that he found in her not only a loved one, but also something more, a spiritual partner, a person who understands him like no one else. They didn't try to hide their emotions. Everyone spoke sincerely, with pain and relief at the same time. Mabel realized that their feelings could not be ignored, but their nature made the situation difficult. She knew they both had to find a way to live with those feelings without destroying what they had. After all, love is not always expressed through romance. Sometimes it finds its embodiment in a deep spiritual connection that goes beyond the usual relations. For Jamal, it was a moment of acceptance. He realized that his feelings didn't make him worse, didn't make him weird or wrong. These feelings were a natural response to the love and care he received from his grandmother. But he also realized that their bond couldn't be broken by trying to make it something more than it is now. He accepted that their love would be special, unique, but not violating the boundaries of the family. They decided to leave their feelings on a spiritual level. It was a difficult decision, but they both knew it was the right one. Their love was strong, but it didn't need to be confirmed through actions or words. She was valuable in her own right, existing simply because they were together. The following days became a period of inner peace for them. They realized that their bond was stronger now than ever. Grandma continued to share her stories, and Jamal continued to share his plans for the future. They found solace in the fact that their feelings, though complex, became a source of strength for them, not pain. Jamal decided to stay in his hometown. He found an art-related job and started doing what he always wanted to do: paint. But now his work was filled with meaning. He painted what was dear to him: landscapes associated with the house, portraits of his family members, scenes from the past. Each painting was a tribute to the roots he had found thanks to his grandmother. Mabel, despite her age and illness, has found a new meaning in life. She didn't feel lonely anymore. She knew that her life was meaningful, that her grandson would remember her, her story, what she had given him. She was proud of him, proud of the man he had become. Their connection became the basis for something more. Jamal and Mabel not only became closer to each other, they became an example of how love can take different forms. Their story became a reminder that true love knows no boundaries, but always requires honesty and respect. After those frank conversations, life in the house on Jackson Street began to gradually return to its usual rhythm. However, something has changed. Their connection, previously hidden under a layer of understatement, has now taken on a form that only the two of them can understand. The love between Jamal and Mabel has become more conscious and harmonious, as if both had found their place in the world. But life couldn't stand still. Time demanded that they move forward. Jamal, inspired by his grandmother's wisdom and the history of their family, began to actively work on his art. He got a job at a local cultural center where he taught children the basics of drawing and painting. For him, it became not only a way to earn money, but also a chance to pass on his values to the next generation. His paintings, filled with symbolism and soul, began to attract attention. He painted scenes from his family's past: his grandmother in her youth, her protest for rights, his grandfather on the farm. Each painting told the story of struggle, love, and the connection of generations. These works resonated with local residents, and later, beyond their small town. His exhibition Roots and Crowns became a real event, attracting people who were looking for something sincere and deep. But what pleased Jamal the most was that he was able to feel like a creator again. Art became a way for him to deal with any internal contradictions. He thanked Mabel for this, because it was her stories that inspired him to return to what he had loved since childhood. For Mabel, this new chapter of her life has become no less significant. Her health still required attention, but her spirit seemed to have become stronger. She saw her grandson flourish, and it brought her great satisfaction. In the house on Jackson Street, she decided to open a small corner of memory, a family museum. There they placed the previously created archive, antique objects, photographs and letters. Neighbors often stopped by to see this corner of history, and each time Mabel was happy to share stories about her family. She's become an important figure in the community. People came to her for advice, shared their experiences, and she responded with the same wisdom that helped Jamal. Her house became the center of a small world in which warmth and understanding reigned. Despite all the joy, fate continued to throw up trials. One day, Mabel's condition worsened. Her health required more serious intervention, and she ended up in the hospital. It was a real shock for Jamal. He realized how much he depended on her, how much his world was tied to her presence. In a hospital room filled with sterile light, Jamal sat next to her bed for hours, holding her hand. These moments reminded him that time is inexorable and that their days together are limited. He decided that he had to do something significant so that their story would not end there. After returning home, he began working on his most ambitious painting, a huge canvas, which he called a living tree. The painting depicted a huge tree, the roots of which went deep into the ground, and the branches were full of bright leaves and fruits. Jamal imprinted symbols of his family in every root and branch, scenes from the past, portraits of ancestors, details that he learned from his grandmother's stories. When the painting was completed, he put on an exhibition right at Mabel's house. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers came to see this work. But for Jamal, it was not just a work of art. It was his declaration of love for his grandmother, for their connection. Mabel returned home, weak but full of pride for her grandson. She saw the painting and shed tears. There was everything in her eyes: gratitude, pride, love. For her, it was proof that her life had not been in vain, that her efforts, her struggle, and her love had left a mark. The last years of their life together were spent in peace and quiet. They have learned to accept their feelings as they are, without fear or shame. Their relationship has become a symbol of the fact that true love is not always passion or romance. It can be deep respect, support, and understanding. When Mabel left this world, Jamal stayed, but he didn't feel lonely. Her spirit, her wisdom, and her love continued to live in him. He became the keeper of her memory, the man who brought her stories to the next generations. Jamal continued to draw and share her stories. The painting, The Living Tree, became the central part of the exhibition, which toured many cities. People were inspired by this work, finding in it a reflection of their own family stories. But for Jamal, it was more than that. It was his declaration of love for the woman who changed his life. The house on Jackson Street has become a place of memory and inspiration. He continued to receive guests, share family history, and Jamal, now an adult and confident man, talked about that amazing woman who taught him to love and appreciate life. Their bond, which has survived trials and prohibitions, has remained forever, defying neither time nor circumstances. It was a love story that found its continuation in the hearts of those who were ready to hear it.